Imagine billions of souls screaming in unison as their entire world is consumed alive, stripped to bedrock by an endless alien hunger that knows no mercy, no reason, only the absolute biological imperative to feed. In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists a fate worse than extinction. It is a doom that transcends mere death, a horror so absolute that it reduces entire civilizations to nothing more than biomass, fuel for an incomprehensible alien hunger that crosses the void between galaxies. This is the fate that befalls a hive world when the Tyranids arrive, and it is a process of such methodical, terrifying efficiency that it stands as one of the most nightmarish scenarios in a galaxy already. Drowning in nightmare. A hive world of the Imperium is already a monument to humanity's capacity for both survival and suffering. These planets are entirely covered in massive urban structures called hive cities, towering constructions of metal and rockcrete that pierce the clouds and burrow deep into the planetary crust. Each hive city houses billions of human souls, stacked vertically in a rigid hierarchy where the wealthy elites occupy the lofty spires that touch the upper atmosphere, breathing recycled but relatively clean air and basking in whatever sunlight penetrates the industrial haze, while the masses toil in the manufactory levels, and the damned rot in the underhive kilometers below ground level, where even the Imperium's light barely reaches. These worlds produce unimaginable quantities of materials, weapons and war machines for the Imperial war effort. Every day, trillions of rounds of ammunition, thousands of tanks, aircraft, and equipment pour from their manufactorums. The population is so vast that individual human life becomes a statistic, a number in an administratum ledger. Children are born, live, and die without ever seeing the sky, their entire existence confined to the same 100-meter section of hive structure their ancestors occupied for generations. This is already a harsh existence, but it is an existence nonetheless. A continuation of the human species, a defiant persistence in an uncaring universe. Then the Tyranids arrive, and everything changes. The first signs are subtle, easily dismissed by the ponderous bureaucracy of the Imperium. Astropathic communications begin to fail. Nearby systems go silent, their screams cut short mid-transmission or simply ceasing without explanation. Trade ships fail to arrive on schedule. These disruptions might seem minor in the grand scheme of Imperial logistics, where delays and losses are commonplace across 1 million worlds. But they form a pattern, a growing shadow that spreads across the star maps. By the time the pattern is recognized, by the time some prescient individual in the administratum realizes that something is systematically silencing an entire sector, it is often already too late. The Tyranid hive fleet does not announce itself with bombastic declarations or demands for surrender. There are no communications, no negotiations, no possibility of diplomacy. The Tyranids are beyond such concepts. They are a biological weapon of galactic scale, evolved over millions of years in the void between galaxies into perfect consumption machines. When their vanguard organisms reach the outer system, they begin the process that has claimed countless worlds before and will claim countless more. A process refined through the devouring of entire galaxies. The vanguard creatures are diverse and specialized. Genestealers, already seated on the world perhaps decades earlier through infected trade ships and cargo, activate their broodmine networks. These creatures, having infiltrated the hive cities through patient infiltration, having bred with the human population to create hybrid cultists who serve the alien hive mind with religious fervor, now reveal themselves. They emerge from the underhives, from hidden cult chambers, from positions of trust and authority where they have patiently waited for this moment. The Genestealer uprising is sudden and catastrophic. Across the hive world simultaneously, the uprising begins. Millions of cultists, many appearing entirely human save for subtle genetic markers, attack critical infrastructure. Power plants explode in carefully coordinated strikes. Water reclamation facilities are sabotaged, their precious output poisoned or simply stopped. Spaceports become battlegrounds as cultists seize landing platforms and defense batteries. The planetary defense forces, already stretched thin across impossible populations, find themselves fighting an enemy that wears familiar faces. that knows every secret passage and structural weakness, that has spent generations preparing for this very moment. But the Genestealer uprising is merely the overture to the true symphony of horror that approaches. While the Hive cities burn from within, while the Imperial Guard regiments desperately try to restore order, and the Adeptus Arbites execute suspected cultists by the thousands, while martial law is declared and entire Hive sections are sealed and purged with fire, the real threat enters the system from the outer dark. The Tyranid Hive fleet arrives in real space like a plague of locusts made manifest on a stellar scale. Bioships by the thousands pour into the system, creatures of chitin and bone and sinew the size of Imperial battleships, living vessels that have crossed the void in hibernation, following the psychic beacon of the brood mind like moths to a flame. These ships are not mechanical constructs, but evolved organisms, grown by the Hive mind for specific purposes, armed with bioweaponry that launches acid, plasma, and living ammunition across the void. They move with purpose, spreading through the system in patterns that speak to an intelligence vast and utterly alien, coordinating millions of units across light minutes of space with perfect synchronization. The Imperial Navy responds, of course. Whatever ships are in system when the Tyranids arrive immediately move to intercept. Emergency astropathic calls go out, pleading for reinforcement, for aid, for salvation. Space battles erupt across the system as Imperial cruisers and battleships engage the bioships in desperate combat. These are not the clean deaths of the void, where ships are crippled by lance strikes and reactor detonations. Tyranid boarding organisms latch onto Imperial vessels like parasites, burning through armor plate with acid, disgorging swarms of creatures that massacre the crew in close-quarters slaughter. Ships that survive the initial engagement find themselves infested, their crews hunted through their own corridors by organisms specifically evolved for such environments. Some ships escape to carry warning to neighboring systems. Most do not. The Tyranid fleet establishes orbital superiority through sheer numbers and biological adaptability. For every bioship destroyed, 2 more press forward. The creatures evolve in real time, adapting to Imperial weapons and tactics, growing new organs and armor configurations to counter threats. This is the true horror of the Tyranids, their ability to learn, to adapt, to incorporate new genetic material and emerge stronger from every encounter. Once orbital superiority is established, the next phase begins. The mycetic spores start falling. These are living drop pods, organic landing craft grown by the thousands in the bioships above. They plunge through the atmosphere like meteors, burning through the sky in trails of fire, each one containing horrors waiting to be unleashed. The spores are resilient beyond measure, surviving impacts that would destroy any mechanical craft, and they land everywhere at once across the Hive world. An invasion of such scale and coordination that defense becomes nearly impossible. From the spores emerge the ground forces of the Tyranid swarm. The creatures that pour forth from the mycetic spores represent millennia of evolutionary refinement, each organism a perfect expression of biological warfare, designed by the Hive mind for specific tactical roles. The first to emerge are often the smaller organisms, the termagants and hormagaunts, creatures roughly human-sized, but possessing a lethality that far exceeds their size. Termagants carry living weapons called Devourers, symbiotic organisms that spit flesh-eating beetles at hypersonic speeds, each beetle boring into flesh and devouring the victim from within. Hormagaunts are living blades, scything talons and lightning speed, evolved for one purpose alone, to close with the enemy and rend them apart in melee combat so swift that human reflexes cannot track their movements. But these lesser organisms are merely the tide, the endless wave that crashes against Imperial defenses. Behind them come the true monsters, Tyranid warriors, towering creatures that stand taller than a space marine, coordinate the swarm through synaptic links to the Hive mind, directing lesser organisms with gestalt intelligence. These warriors are armed with a terrifying array of bioweapons, from venom cannons that fire crystallized toxins capable of melting through tank armor to bone zords that can cleave through ceramite. They are generals and soldiers both, extensions of the Hive mind's will made flesh. Carnifexes, living tanks of bone and muscle, smash through defensive fortifications as if they were constructed of paper. These creatures weigh tons, their armored carapaces shrugging off small arms fire as they ram through walls and crush defenders beneath claws the size of a grown man. Some carnifexes are configured for ranged combat, bearing biocannons that launch organisms of pure destruction across the battlefield. Others are optimized for close assault, their massive scything talons capable of tearing through vehicle armor and bisecting armored infantry with contemptuous ease. The Imperial defenders fight with everything they possess. The planetary defense forces man the walls of the Hive cities, firing laser guns into the approaching swarm until their power packs run dry, and then fixing bayonets for the inevitable melee. The Adeptus Arbites holds key choke points with ruthless efficiency. Their combat shotguns and riot shields designed for crowd control now repurposed against an alien tide. If the Hive world is fortunate, there may be Imperial Guard regiments present, professional soldiers with heavy weapons and armored support. If the world is truly blessed, Space Marines might respond to the distress calls, dropping from orbit in Thunderhawk gunships to establish defensive positions and lead counterattacks. But fortune is a rare commodity in the 41st millennium, and blessings are rarer still. Most Hive worlds must face the Tyranid invasion with only their own resources, and those resources, however vast they might seem in absolute terms, are finite against an enemy that grows stronger with every passing hour. The Tyranids do not simply attack. They transform the battlefield itself. Specialized organisms called biovores launch spore mines into the air, living explosives that drift on the wind until they detect movement and detonate in showers of acid and shrapnel. These mines create no man's lands that the defenders cannot cross without suffering horrific casualties. Venomthropes secrete toxic clouds that roll across the battlefield like fog, dissolving anything organic that enters their radius into liquefied slurry. Defenders who breathe these clouds die screaming, their lungs dissolving, their eyes melting from their sockets, their flesh sloughing from their bones. The Hive mind is patient and methodical. It probes the defenses, testing for weaknesses, sacrificing lesser organisms to learn the location of heavy weapons emplacements and strong points. Every death feeds information back through the synaptic network, and the swarm adapts. Defenders who successfully hold a position against one wave find the next wave configured specifically to counter their tactics. Heavy bolter nests that massacre termagants find themselves targeted by biovore bombardment or flanked by lictors, chameleonic creatures that infiltrate behind the lines and assassinate officers and weapon crews. The psychological impact of fighting Tyranids cannot be overstated. These are not human enemies who can be reasoned with, intimidated, or broken by displays of force. The swarm feels no fear, accepts no surrender, and shows no mercy. For every Tyranid killed, 10 more press forward over the corpse. The screeching of the swarm, a biological cacophony of chittering, roaring, and alien vocalizations, creates a soundscape of madness that erodes the sanity of defenders. Men who have fought orcs and chaos cultists without flinching break when faced with the Tyranids, their minds unable to process the sheer alienness of the threat. The PDF troopers are the first to break in most cases. These are not professional soldiers, but conscripts, men and women pulled from the manufactorum floors and given rudimentary training and equipment. When the Tyranid swarm hits their positions in full force, when the air fills with living ammunition and the ground shakes with the tread of monsters, when their comrades die in ways that defy comprehension, many simply flee. Officers execute deserters on the spot, but fear is contagious, and once a line begins to waver, the collapse is inevitable. The Hive cities become prisons. The outer defensive walls, built to keep out the lawless dregs of the Underhive and the occasional orc raid, prove inadequate against a threat of this magnitude. Tyranid organisms scale the walls like insects, their claws finding purchase in the smallest cracks, or they simply batter through gates with monstrous strength. Once the outer defenses are breached, the fighting moves into the Hive proper, and here the Tyranids possess a terrible advantage. The narrow corridors, the vertical shafts, the labyrinthine passages that characterize Hive city construction are perfect terrain for the swarm. Humans need light to fight, space to maneuver, clear lines of fire. Tyranids need none of these things. They can see in complete darkness through alien senses. They can navigate three-dimensional terrain with ease, and their smaller organisms are perfectly sized for tunnel fighting. Hormagaunts pour through ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels, emerging behind defensive lines to cause havoc. Gen-stealers, now openly working with the swarm, use their intimate knowledge of the hive structure to guide the assault to critical locations. The defenders fall back level by level, section by section. Emergency bulkheads are sealed, trapping thousands of civilians on the wrong side to buy time for the rest. These sacrifices are made with grim calculation by the Hive's nobility and military command. Every level abandoned is filled with billions of tons of ammunition, supplies, and most importantly, people. The civilians cannot all be evacuated. There is nowhere to evacuate them to. The spaceports are under constant attack, and even if ships could land, there are not enough vessels in the entire sector to evacuate even a fraction of the population before the swarm overwhelms the Hive completely. So the civilians die. They die by the millions, trapped in sealed sections as the Tyranids break through, hunted through the hab blocks and factorums they once called home. The fortunate are killed quickly, torn apart by scything talons or shot by devourer beetles. The unfortunate are captured alive by specialized organisms designed for that very purpose. These organisms, sometimes called lictors or ravenors depending on their configuration, do not kill immediately. Instead, they paralyze their victims with toxins and drag them to designated collection points. Here, other specialized Tyranid forms process the living captives, injecting them with digestive enzymes that begin breaking down their bodies while they still live. The victims remain conscious during this process, aware as their flesh liquefies, as they are absorbed into the greater biomass of the swarm. Their final moments are screaming agony, and their screams join the chorus of billions suffering the same fate across the Hive world. This is the true purpose of the invasion. The Tyranids are not conquerors in any traditional sense. They do not seek territory or resources in the way other species do. They seek only biomass, organic material that can be consumed, broken down, and reconstituted into more Tyranid organisms. Every defender killed becomes raw material. Every civilian captured feeds the swarm. The very bodies of the victims are used to create more attackers, a horrifying equation where each imperial death makes the Tyranids stronger. The hive mind coordinates this consumption with terrifying efficiency. As the ground forces push deeper into the hive cities, claiming more territory and more victims, the bioships in orbit begin the next phase. These massive creatures extend enormous tendrils down from orbit, organic tubes kilometers in circumference that anchor themselves to the planet's surface. These are called capillary towers, and they serve as conduits for biomass transfer. The collected biomass, the liquefied remains of billions of people, along with any organic material that can be digested, is pumped through these capillary towers into the bioships above. There, in massive internal chambers, the genetic material is broken down completely, reduced to its constituent base pairs, and then reassembled into new Tyranid organisms according to the needs of the hive mind. It is recycling on a planetary scale, and it is mercilessly efficient. As the invasion progresses into its middle stages, the true scale of the Tyranid strategy becomes horrifyingly apparent. The assault on the hive cities, devastating though it is, represents only one aspect of the consumption. While the swarm batters through human defenses and processes the population into biomass, other specialized organisms begin the systematic stripping of the planet itself. The Tyranids do not merely want the people. They want everything. Across the continents, in regions far from the hive cities where human presence is minimal or non-existent, different organisms deploy. Lictors and other vanguard creatures have been mapping the planet since before the main fleet arrived, cataloging resources, identifying areas rich in organic material, marking locations for optimal consumption. Now, larger organisms arrive to begin the harvest. Harridan swarms darken the skies, these flying behemoths serving as mobile nests for smaller organisms. They patrol the planet's surface, seeking out any remaining pockets of life. In the oceans, if the hive world possesses them, specialized aquatic Tyranid forms hunt down marine life, processing entire ecosystems in a matter of days. Every fish, every plant, every microorganism becomes fuel for the swarm. The planet's vegetation, whatever remains of it on a hive world where industrial pollution has choked most natural growth, is targeted by specialized consuming organisms. These creatures, sometimes classified as ripper swarms in their smallest form or Harrispex and Tyranifex variants in their larger configurations, possess digestive systems capable of breaking down any organic compound. They move across the landscape like a living carpet, consuming everything in their path. Trees, grasses, fungi, even bacterial mats in the soil, all of it is devoured and processed. But the Tyranids go further. They do not stop at surface vegetation. Specialized burrowing organisms tunnel deep into the planetary crust, seeking out underground ecosystems, fossil fuel deposits, even microbial life existing in the extreme environments of deep rock strata. These organisms, driven by the hive mind's imperative to extract every possible calorie of energy, dig thousands of kilometers down, their acid secretions and diamond-hard claws making short work of solid rock. Meanwhile, in the hive cities, the defense continues its inevitable collapse. By this stage, the PDF has largely ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Those who have not been killed or converted into biomass have either fled into the deepest reaches of the underhive, hoping against hope that the Tyranids will not pursue them into those toxic depths, or they have thrown down their weapons and await their fate with the dull resignation of the defeated. The Imperial Guard regiments, if present, fight on with grim professionalism. These are hardened soldiers, veterans of countless wars, and they understand what is at stake. They establish kill zones in the main arterial passages of the hive, fields of fire where heavy bolters, autocannons, and lascannons can enfilade any Tyranid organism attempting to pass. For hours, sometimes days, these positions hold, stacking alien corpses until they block the corridors and must be cleared with flamers before the killing can continue. But ammunition is finite. The Tyranids are not. The guard commanders watch their stockpiles dwindle with each engagement, rationing rounds with increasing desperation. They send requests up the command chain for resupply, for reinforcement, for anything that might turn the tide. But the responses, when they come at all, offer only platitudes and exhortations to faith in the Emperor. The truth, which the guard officers understand even if they dare not voice it, is that the hive world is lost. The Imperium cannot afford to send the resources necessary to repel a Tyranid hive fleet. The calculus is brutal but inescapable. To save this one world would require diverting forces from a dozen other critical fronts. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. The loss of one, even one housing hundreds of billions of souls, is acceptable if it preserves the greater whole. So the defenders are abandoned. They are given encouraging messages about relief forces on the way, about the Emperor's protection, about the nobility of sacrifice in his name. Some believe these messages, most do not. But they fight on regardless, because to stop fighting means immediate death, and human beings cling to life even in the most hopeless circumstances. If Space Marines are present, their impact is more significant, but ultimately just as futile. The Adeptus Astartes are the Emperor's finest warriors, genetically enhanced superhuman soldiers equipped with the best war gear the Imperium can provide. A single Space Marine is worth 100 regular soldiers in combat effectiveness. They establish strong points throughout the hive, rallying the defenders, leading counterattacks that temporarily push back the swarm, buying time measured in hours rather than minutes. But even Space Marines can be overwhelmed. The hive mind learns from each encounter, probing the Astartes' defenses, testing their capabilities. It sends specialized organisms against them. Tyranid warriors equipped with bonezords that can pierce ceramite, carnifexes that can match a dreadnought in close combat, lictors that assassinate isolated Marines. The Space Marines extract a terrible toll on the swarm, each one killing hundreds or thousands of Tyranid organisms before falling, but fall they eventually do, dragged down by sheer weight of numbers or outmaneuvered by the hive mind's cold strategic intelligence. The civilian population, trapped in the contested zones of the hive, experiences hell. Those who remain alive huddle in sealed chambers, listening to the sounds of battle growing ever closer, knowing that when the fighting reaches them, their end will come. Some pray to the Emperor. Some lose their sanity and must be restrained by their fellows. Some attempt to flee deeper into the hive, only to discover that the paths downward are already infested with Tyranid organisms. Genestealer cults, their purpose fulfilled, become even more dangerous. With the Tyranids now openly present, the cultists no longer need to hide their true nature. Pure-strain genestealers lead hybrid followers in attacks against refugee centers and makeshift shelters. They spread terror and confusion behind the defensive lines, destroying infrastructure, poisoning water supplies, and generally sowing chaos to aid the swarm's advance. The noble houses that rule the hive cities from their spire palaces face a choice. Some decide to fight to the end, marshaling their private armies and fortifying their holdings. These last stands, while doomed, sometimes achieve a certain nobility. The nobility, fighting alongside their household guards and servants, die defending the culture and wealth they spent lifetimes accumulating. Others choose a different path. They attempt to flee off-world, using whatever influence and resources they possess to secure passage on the few ships still willing to risk landing on a Tyranid-infested world. These evacuation attempts are chaotic affairs. Ships are mobbed by desperate crowds willing to kill for a chance at escape. Some vessels take on far too many passengers, their life support systems overtaxed, their hulls creaking under loads they were never designed to carry. Other ships are infected with genestealer organisms hiding among the refugees, carrying the Tyranid curse to whatever worlds they reach. Most evacuation attempts fail. The Tyranid blockade in orbit is comprehensive. Bioships swarm any craft attempting to break atmosphere, latching onto hulls with boarding organisms or simply destroying the vessels with bioplasma weapons. The void around the hive world becomes a graveyard, filled with the debris of failed escape attempts, each wreck representing thousands of lives ended in fire and vacuum. Those few ships that do escape carry with them the stories of what transpired below. They spread the word to neighboring systems, sounding the alarm, warning others of the approaching hive fleet. This intelligence is valuable, but it is also a source of terror. Systems in the projected path of the Tyranids begin their own preparations, evacuating non-essential personnel, fortifying defenses, calling in favors, and begging for military aid. A wave of refugees spreads ahead of the hive fleet, straining the resources of every world they reach. Back on the dying hive world, the Tyranids continue their methodical consumption. By this stage, large sections of the planet's surface have been completely stripped of organic material. Where once there were forests, now there is only bare rock and soil. Where once oceans teemed with life, now only dead water remains, all its inhabitants processed into the swarm. The Tyranids deploy even more specialized organisms to extract the remaining biomass. Molochs, massive burrowing creatures, tunnel through the hive cities from below, emerging without warning to swallow entire squads of defenders before disappearing back into the earth. Trigons carve massive tunnels through the planetary crust, creating arterial passages through which the swarm can rapidly redeploy forces. The atmosphere itself begins to change. The bioships in orbit release spores by the trillions, microscopic organisms that drift on the winds and begin to alter the chemical composition of the air. These spores serve multiple purposes. Some are toxic to human life, making it difficult to breathe even in areas not yet directly invaded. Others begin breaking down inorganic materials, secreting acids that corrode metal and stone, weakening structures and defenses. Still others serve as airborne scouts, feeding sensory information back to the hive mind through psychic links. The sky takes on an alien hue. The natural blue of atmosphere gives way to a sick. The final stages of a Tyranid invasion represent the complete and total consumption of the world. By this point, organized military resistance has effectively ended. The hive cities are ruins, their massive structures compromised by Tyranid assault organisms, their populations processed into biomass or scattered into isolated pockets awaiting harvest. The landscape, once dominated by humanity's architectural presence, has been transformed into something utterly alien. The capillary towers that descend from orbit have multiplied. Dozens, then hundreds of these massive organic structures root themselves into the planet's surface, forming a grotesque forest of pulsing tubes. Each one throbs rhythmically as it pumps biomass upward to the fleet above, a visible manifestation of the planet being drained of life. The sound they make is a deep bass rumble, felt more than heard, a vibration that seems to emanate from the planet's core itself. Around the base of each capillary tower, specialized Tyranid organisms tend the harvest. Massive creatures classified as exocrines and tyrannofexes guard against any remaining Imperial forces that might attempt to sabotage the operation, though such attempts are increasingly rare. Processing organisms, creatures evolved specifically for breaking down and preparing biomass for transport, work continuously, their digestive systems handling millions of tons of material. The hive mind begins withdrawing some of its combat organisms from the field. With resistance effectively ended, these creatures are no longer needed. They return to designated zones where they are deliberately processed, their own biomass added to the harvest. This self-consumption might seem wasteful, but it represents maximum efficiency from the Tyranid perspective. Every calorie of energy spent in the invasion is recovered, plus the enormous additional biomass of the world itself. The planet's water begins to disappear. Specialized organisms pump oceans and lakes into the bioships above, or break down the water molecules for their constituent elements. Hydrogen and oxygen, separated and processed, serve various purposes in Tyranid biology. The water cycle that once sustained whatever life remained on the hive world ceases to function. Rivers run dry. Underground aquifers are drained. The very air becomes desiccated as atmospheric moisture is extracted. Deep underground, perhaps in the lowest reaches of the hive cities or in natural caverns that honeycomb the crust, the last remnants of humanity persist. These survivors are beyond rescue, beyond even hope. They know the surface is lost, that the entire planet is in the process of being devoured. They have no communication with the wider Imperium, no way to call for help even if help were available. They simply exist, surviving on whatever supplies they manage to carry into their refuges, waiting for the inevitable moment when the Tyranids find them. These final survivors sometimes discover Genestealer cult chambers in the depths, abandoned now that the cult's purpose is fulfilled. They find evidence of the infiltration that occurred years or decades before, the patient work of seeding a world for consumption. Some survivors understand then how thoroughly they were betrayed, how the monster that killed their world was invited in by their own neighbors and perhaps family members. Others, their minds already broken by the trauma of the invasion, simply add this revelation to the catalog of horrors they have witnessed. The Tyranids eventually do find these last holdouts. Lictors, patient and methodical, explore every cavity in the planetary crust. Trigons burrow through rock to access sealed chambers. Molochs erupt from below to devour the last pockets of resistance. There is no escape. There is no miracle salvation. There is only the end, delayed but never denied. Some survivors choose to deny the Tyranids their biomass in the only way available. Mass suicides occur, entire communities choosing death on their own terms rather than processing by the swarm. They use whatever means are available: poison, explosive decompression, fire. These acts of defiance, tragic though they are, represent a final assertion of human agency against an enemy that views humanity as nothing more than resources to be harvested. Others fight to the absolute end, meeting the Tyranids with whatever weapons remain available. These last stands are witnessed by no one, recorded by no one, but they happen nonetheless throughout the dying world. Men and women who have lost everything, who have no hope of survival, still raise weapons against the swarm in those final moments. They die as they lived, defiant to the last breath. And though their deaths change nothing in the grand strategic situation, there is a certain nobility in refusing to submit even when submission and resistance lead to the same fate. The planet itself begins to die visibly. The continents, stripped of all vegetation and topsoil, become barren wastelands of exposed bedrock. The Tyranids extract organic material from the soil itself, consuming the microbial life and organic compounds that would normally support plant growth. What remains is sterile, lifeless dust that the winds whip into choking storms. The atmosphere continues to thin as its gases are processed. The oxygen content, once maintained by photosynthetic life, drops precipitously. The temperature fluctuates wildly without the moderating influence of oceans and atmosphere. During the day, without atmospheric protection, the surface temperature soars. At night, it plummets. These extremes would kill any remaining unprotected life even if the Tyranids were not actively hunting. The tectonic damage becomes severe. The massive burrowing operations, the extraction of material from deep within the crust, destabilizes geological structures. Earthquakes become frequent and severe. Volcanic activity increases as magma chambers, their overlying rock removed or weakened, breach the surface. These volcanic eruptions add ash and toxic gases to the already contaminated atmosphere, accelerating the planet's transformation into a dead world. In orbit, the bioships continue their work. The biomass collected from the surface is processed in massive internal chambers, broken down through both mechanical and chemical means into a nutrient soup that can be reconstituted into whatever the hive mind requires. New organisms are grown constantly, replacing losses from the invasion and adding to the fleet's strength. The bioships themselves grow larger, incorporating additional biomass into their own structures, adding new weapon systems and capabilities based on whatever genetic material proved most useful during the invasion. Some of the biomass is stored in specialized organs within the bioships, held in stasis for later use. This reserve ensures the fleet can continue operating between worlds, can breed new organisms in the void without requiring an immediate source of food. The efficiency is remarkable. Virtually nothing is wasted. Even the excretions of the various organisms are collected and reprocessed. The hive mind also evaluates the genetic material collected during the invasion. Human DNA, along with the DNA of any other organisms encountered on the world, is analyzed and cataloged. Useful traits are identified. The human capacity for fine manipulation, perhaps, or specific resistances to environmental toxins that evolved in populations living in the underhive. These traits are added to the Tyranid genetic database, ready to be incorporated into future organism designs. This genetic piracy is one of the most insidious aspects of the Tyranid threat. Every world they consume makes them stronger, not just in terms of biomass, but in terms of evolutionary potential. They take the best adaptations from every species they encounter and add them to their own arsenal. A hive world, despite its degraded environment, still represents billions of years of evolutionary history encoded in the DNA of its inhabitants. That information is not lost when the Tyranids devour it. It is stolen, repurposed, and will be used against the next world in the hive fleet's path. As the biomass extraction nears completion, the character of the Tyranid presence on the ground changes. The massive swarms of smaller organisms that characterize the invasion's assault phase are mostly gone, consumed and reconstituted into new forms or withdrawn into the ships above. What remains on the surface are primarily the harvesting organisms, the massive creatures that continue to break down what little remains, and the guardians that protect the capillary towers from threats that no longer exist. The psychic pressure emanating from the hive mind reaches its peak during this phase. The shadow in the warp, as Imperial Psychers call it, is a side effect of the collective consciousness of trillions of Tyranid organisms. This psychic phenomenon makes warp travel impossible in the region and causes extreme distress to any Psychers in the area. On the dying hive world, any surviving astropaths or sanctioned Psychers experience indescribable agony, their minds unable to filter out the alien consciousness that surrounds them. Most go insane or die, their brains simply unable to process the inhuman thoughts that press in from all sides. This psychic shadow also affects normal humans to a lesser degree. Survivors report feelings of overwhelming despair, of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible, of hearing whispers in a language that bypasses the ears and speaks directly to the hindbrain. Sleep becomes impossible or is plagued by nightmares of being consumed, of losing identity and individuality, of becoming part of something larger and utterly alien. Some survivors, their minds already fragile from the trauma of watching their world die, succumb completely to madness. The hive mind feels nothing for these suffering remnants. It does not hate tea. The absolute final stage of consumption represents a level of destruction that challenges human comprehension. The planet, once a thriving hive world housing hundreds of billions of souls, is reduced to something that can barely be classified as a world at all. The Tyranids, Having extracted virtually all useful material, begin their withdrawal, but not before ensuring that nothing of value remains for any other species to claim. The withdrawal process itself demonstrates the Tyranids' efficiency. The capillary towers, having served their purpose, are disconnected from the bioships above. Rather than simply abandoning these massive structures, the Tyranids process them as well. Specialized organisms dismantle the towers, breaking them down into transportable components that are lifted to orbit. Within days, structures that took weeks to grow and stood kilometers tall are gone, leaving only massive craters where they once anchored to the surface. The few remaining Tyranid organisms on the ground are recalled. They march, crawl, burrow, and fly to designated extraction points where mycetic spores descend to retrieve them. These organisms, having survived the entire invasion, represent valuable genetic material that has proven its effectiveness in combat. The hive mind wastes nothing, and certainly not combat-proven organisms that might be useful in the next invasion. Some organisms are deliberately left behind, however. These are not oversight but strategic choices. Genistealers, the infiltrators that seeded the world before the invasion, are sometimes abandoned to disperse into space on debris or derelict ships, carrying their genetic curse to other worlds. Other organisms are left as biological traps, dormant creatures buried deep that might awaken and attack any salvage teams or exploration parties that visit the dead world in the future. The bioships, now gorged with biomass, begin departing orbit. They do not all leave at once, but in waves, some remaining to provide protection for the last extraction operations, while others move to the edge of the system to begin the long journey to the next target. The departure is as coordinated as the arrival was, each bioship knowing its role in the fleet hierarchy, each movement serving the greater strategic purpose determined by the hive mind. As the bioships withdraw, they leave behind a graveyard. The orbital space around the planet is littered with debris, destroyed Imperial ships from the failed defense, wrecked defense satellites, pieces of bioships that were destroyed during the invasion and never recovered. This debris field will orbit the dead world for centuries, a monument to the civilization that once existed here and the alien horror that ended it. The planet itself, viewed from orbit as the last bioships depart, is unrecognizable. Where once there was a world of gray hive cities punctuated by industrial wastelands, now there is a ball of barren rock. The atmosphere is thin and toxic, barely qualifying as atmosphere at all. The surface is cratered and scarred, mountains collapsed, ocean basins exposed as dry depressions. No water remains. No life persists. The temperature extremes, without atmospheric protection, make the surface alternately a furnace and a freezer. Tectonic activity continues for years after the Tyranids leave, the planet's geological structure so fundamentally damaged that it cannot stabilize. Earthquakes ripple across the surface regularly. Volcanic eruptions, triggered by the destabilization, pour molten rock from fissures. These eruptions are not like those on living worlds, part of a natural geological cycle. They are death spasms, the planet literally tearing itself apart from the damage inflicted during the consumption. The electromagnetic signature of the world changes dramatically. The industrial electromagnetic noise that once radiated from billions of machines falls silent. The regular patterns of Hive City power grids, visible across the spectrum, disappear. What remains is only natural electromagnetic activity, and even that is distorted by the tectonic chaos and the residual effects of Tyranid biotechnology. If the Imperium sends scouts to assess the world after the Hive fleet moves on, what they find is conclusive evidence of humanity's worst nightmare realized. The scouts, protected by sealed suits and careful to avoid any remaining Tyranid organisms, catalog the destruction. They find the ruins of hive cities, collapsed and stripped of anything organic. They find mass graves, though calling them graves is generous when they are simply piles of bones, all soft tissue consumed. They find evidence of the final days, weapons discharged until their power packs died, defensive positions overrun, sealed bunkers breached. The scouts also collect genetic samples, analyzing the residual Tyranid biomatter for intelligence purposes. The Adeptus Mechanicus Biologus, the branch of the Mechanicus that studies Xenos life forms, is particularly interested in these samples. Every invasion leaves behind clues about the Hive fleet's capabilities, its organism designs, its tactics. This intelligence is compiled and distributed to Imperial forces, though its usefulness is limited. The Tyranids evolve so rapidly that tactics that worked against one tendril of a Hive fleet may be obsolete against another tendril of the same fleet encountered months later. The psychological impact of a consumed world extends far beyond the system where it occurred. News of the planet's fate spreads through the Imperium, carried by the refugees who escaped and by official Imperial communications. The story of the Hive world's death becomes a cautionary tale, repeated in briefings to military commanders, used by the ecclesiarchy to reinforce the necessity of faith and vigilance, and whispered in fearful tones by common citizens who understand that their world might be next. For neighboring systems, the consumed world serves as a grim reminder of their vulnerability. Defense preparations intensify. Militaries drill more frequently. Genestealer cult hunting becomes a priority, with suspected cultists executed on minimal evidence in waves of paranoid purges. These purges often kill innocent people, but the authorities reason that some innocent deaths are acceptable if they prevent infiltration by the Tyranid vanguard. The economic impact is severe. Trade routes that pass through the now-dead system must be rerouted, adding time and cost to shipping. The production output from the Hive world, which might have supplied equipment and ammunition to dozens of nearby systems, is permanently lost. Other Hive worlds must increase their production to compensate, placing additional strain on already overworked populations. The ripple effects of a single world's death can destabilize entire subsectors economically. Strategically, the consumed world represents a loss of territory that the Imperium can ill afford. While the Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds, each world lost to the Tyranids brings the defensive perimeter closer to critical systems. The loss of a Hive world is particularly devastating because these planets are typically positioned as bulwarks, their massive populations providing defenders in vast numbers. When a Hive world falls, the defensive depth of an entire region is compromised. The Hive fleet, meanwhile, moves on to its next target. The consumption of the Hive world has provided it with resources to breed new organisms, to repair damaged bioships, and to grow larger. The fleet is stronger after the invasion than before it, having converted the biomass of an entire world into additional combat power. This is the terrifying mathematics of fighting Tyranids. Every world they consume makes them more dangerous, while every world the Imperium loses makes it weaker. The Hive mind does not celebrate its victory because such concepts are meaningless to it. It simply continues executing its biological imperative: find life, consume it, grow stronger, repeat. The intelligence governing the Tyranids is vast, but focused entirely on this single purpose. It has no culture, no art, no philosophy beyond the drive to consume. It is hunger made manifest on a galactic scale, and it will not stop until there is nothing left to consume. For the Imperium, each consumed world reinforces the existential nature of the Tyranid threat. Unlike other Xeno species, the Tyranids cannot be negotiated with, cannot be reasoned with, cannot even be properly understood. They represent something fundamentally inimical to all other life, an extinction force that arrives from beyond the galaxy itself. The Imperium's response is necessarily total. Every Tyranid must be killed, every Hive fleet must be destroyed, or humanity faces extinction. But destroying the Hive fleets is a task of impossible magnitude. For every bioship destroyed, for every tendril of a fleet cut off and eliminated, more Tyranids continue to arrive from intergalactic space. The Imperium fights a defensive war, reacting to invasions rather than striking at the source, because the source lies beyond reach, beyond the galaxy itself, in the void where no human ship can travel. The consumed Hive world becomes a symbol of this greater struggle. Its death is mourned by those who knew it, studied by those who fight the Tyranids, and eventually forgotten by most as new crises demand attention. But the planet itself remains, a dead monument orbiting its star, a gravestone for the billions who perished there. Centuries later, millennia later, it will still be there, lifeless and silent, a testament to the price humanity pays in the grim darkness of the far future. Some imperial authorities argue for reclaiming such worlds, for investing the resources necessary to restart their biospheres and rebuild their civilizations. These arguments are always rejected. The cost would be astronomical, requiring centuries of terraforming effort and